Try to understand the basic message. Evaluate the content, feeling, and meaning expressed by the speaker. Restate what you have been told in simple terms. When restating, look for non-verbal as well as verbal cues that confirm or deny the accuracy of your paraphrasing. Note that some speakers may pretend you have got it right because they are unable to assert themselves or are unable to disagree with you. Clarification. In communication, clarification involves ensuring that the speaker receives an accurate feedback from the listener, thereby making sure that the listener has understood correctly, thus resolving any areas of confusion or misunderstanding. Clarification is important in many situations, especially when what is being discussed is complicated or unfamiliar to the audience. Communication can be difficult in many situations, especially when sensitive emotions are being discussed or if the topic at hand contains a message that may be offensive to certain sections of the society due to inherent social biases. This might pose a problem even when conveying complex technical information to those who are unfamiliar with the intricacy of a certain engineering process or detail. The purpose of clarification is to reassure the speaker that the listener is interested in what is being discussed and that the latter is making a genuine attempt to understand what is being conveyed. Clarification can involve asking questions or occasionally summarizing what the speaker has said. A listener can ask for clarifications when they cannot make sense of a speaker's responses. Sometimes the messages that a speaker is attempting to send can be highly complex, involving many participants and issues. Clarifying encourages the listeners to identify his shortcomings while helping the speaker streamline his priorities. Some examples of non-directive clarifications are: I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to say. I'm not sure if I understand what the central issue is. When you said, what did you really mean? Could you repeat? Non-judgmental clarification. When you are the listener in a sensitive environment, the right sort of non-directive questioning can enable the speaker to describe their viewpoint more honestly. Asking the right question at the right moment can be crucial and comes with practice. The best questions are open-ended as they give the speaker a choice of how to respond, whereas closed questions allow very limited responses. Open questions are the best way to assist a speaker and an audience on sensitive issues, for example, AIDS awareness or the rights of LGBT people. These questions encourage speakers to be open and elucidate their thoughts. Closed questions usually elicit a yes or no response and do not encourage speakers to be open and expand upon their thoughts. Guidelines for clarification. When using clarification as an aid, follow these guidelines to communicate effectively. Admit if you are unsure about what the speaker has conveyed. Insist on a repetition if you think you have misunderstood the conversation. State what the speaker has said as you understand it and check whether this is what they really meant. Ask if you have got it right and be prepared to be corrected without any resentment. Ask for specific examples. Use open, non-directive questions to facilitate a response. Providing and receiving feedback. In life, as much as in work, it's important to learn how to provide effective and constructive feedback to others without causing an offense. There are many moments in life when you have to do this, from commenting on the way that your colleague has carried out a task to discussing your children's behavior with them. What is effective feedback? For generic purposes, we will define effective feedback as that which is clearly heard, understood, and accepted. Those are the areas that are within your power. You have no control over whether the recipient chooses to act upon your feedback, so let us ignore that. So, how can you ensure that your feedback is effective? Refine your skills by using these rules, and you'll soon find that you're a much better communicator. Feedback delves into behavior, not personality. The most important rule of providing constructive feedback is to remember that you are not allowed to stereotype people or comment on their personal beliefs or ideals. You are only allowed to comment on their behavior as panelists in a symposium. Do not be tempted to discuss aspects of personality, intelligence, or anything else that is not remotely related to the discussion at hand. Feedback describes the influence of the person's behavior on the audience. However, this is highly subjective. After all, you cannot measure the qualitative effect or the efficiency of a discussion on anyone else. You can only measure your own responses from what you have chosen to conclude from the discussion. Presenting a feedback makes it much easier for the recipient, orator, or listener to hear, accept, and work upon his or her shortcomings. It does not matter if the feedback is negative. After all, they do not have any control over your emotions, nor can you direct their intentions. This approach is a blame-free one, which is universally acceptable. Feedback should be as specific as possible. When things are not going well, we all know that it's tempting to start by belittling the orator or audience. But don't. Think about the specifics rather than getting into nonsensical arguments that lead nowhere. Timing the feedback. It is useless to convey your feedback, whether negative or positive, 6 months after an event or discussion. Memory is transient, and thus the feedback needs to be well timed, which means while everyone can still remember the sequence of events. If you want to convey your point of view, just go ahead and do it. That does not mean that you provide a feedback without giving it a thought. You still need to think about what you're going to say and how you are going to frame your response. Offending someone is never a solution. Opinions are not just generated in formal meetings. Choose the tone and pitch of your feedback carefully. Every interaction is an opportunity for providing and receiving feedback. Some of the most important exchanges may happen casually over a cup of coffee. Lucy, laughing, says, "You remind me of my mum." Jane, her boss, says, "Really? Why?" Lucy comments, "She gets really snappy with me when she's stressed too." Jane comments, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Have I been snapping at you? I'm a bit stressed, but I'll try not to do it in the future. Thank you for telling me, and I'm sorry you needed to." Lucy had, quite casually, raised a serious behavioral issue with Jane, who, having been made aware of her behavior, chose to change it. Make sure your questions focus on behavior and not personality. Emotional intelligence is essential. You need to be aware of your emotions, self-awareness, and also be able to manage them, self-control, so that even if the feedback causes a negative emotional response, you can control it with maturity. And finally, always thank the person who has provided the feedback. They have already noticed that you have paid attention and acknowledged the premise of the conversation. So even if your points of view are divergent, accept it. Acceptance does not mean that you are wrong or that the appraiser is right. However, as the recipient, you need to consider the feedback and decide how, if at all, you wish to act upon it. This is entirely up to you. But remember that the person providing the feedback felt strongly enough to bother mentioning it to you. Be courteous and give the issue some consideration. If not for anything else, at least so you do not generate that negative response in the future. If someone reaches out and provides you with any kind of assistance, you should send them a thank you note. The world is busy, people are busy. If you turned your back on someone and walked away without a word of thanks after they've answered your questions or provided you with some kind of help, it would seem rather rude. Using digital media doesn't mean you should lose the nuances of human relationships.